Hi there, my name is Lauren Maitling, and today my focus will be on the filmmaker Germaine Dulac. Before jumping into Germaine's work, I'd like to talk a little bit about her personal life. She was born Charlotte Elizabeth Germaine Sissette Schneider on November 17, 1882, in France, and although she was the daughter of a cavalry captain, she was actually raised by her grandmother in Paris, where she ended up studying arts. She was the second woman director in French films after Alice Guy, and throughout her filmmaking career, she directed 35 plus films from 1915 to 1935. She was actually married for 14 years to a man named Louis Albert Dulac. However, they divorced in 1920, and unfortunately, she passed away in 1942 at only 59 years old. And other than being married to Louis Albert Dulac, Germaine was also a queer woman who had the past lovers of Stasia, Irene, Marie Anne, and a few other writers and actresses that some of us may not know of. But not only was Germaine a queer icon, Germaine Dulac was a socialist, feminist, journalist, impressionist, and surrealist filmmaker. Her growing interest in socialism is actually what motivated her to get into politics in the first place. She more specifically focused in political journalism. Her start in journalism started with the French feminist magazine Le Fronde that she worked at from 1900 to 1913. And as a queer independent woman, Germaine was an activist through her films and in real life during the fight for women's suffrage. Although, unfortunately, since she passed away in 1942, she unfortunately didn't live to see the right to vote for all women in France in 1944. As for surrealism, Dulac's film The Seashell and the Clergyman from 1928 is actually rumored to be the first surrealist film. It's known for elements of dereliction, such as this one of the general in the neglected basement, elegance, such as this one where the clergyman is seen standing in a beautiful and elegant hallway, and the superimposition, such as this shot where the clergyman's face is superimposed on the shell. Some of Dulac's work is actually seen as French Impressionism for its use of dream sequences and fantasies. There's some use of this in The Seashell and the Clergyman, like the moment the clergyman fantasizes about strangling the general to death, which reveals the general's face cracking in half with the use of both makeup and editing. But more impressionistic than this film is the Dulac's The Smiling Madame Baudet, as a woman desperately dreams of leaving her boring marriage with her chaotic husband and even dreaming to murder him. Although Germaine Dulac herself did not live long, her work has outlived her by many, many years. In this clip I'm going to show by UI Cinema, it reveals a few shots from Germaine Dulac's films and also a quote from her herself. Germaine Dulac's 1928 film, The Seashell and the Clergyman, was actually originally based on a script by Antonin Artaud, described as a fragmented vision of frustrated desire, fraught fantasy, and unstable images that intentionally don't cohere. The story basically tells of a clergyman who continues to chase after a woman and his battle with her husband, a lot through dream sequence. The casting in The Seashell and the Clergyman is prominent because of Dulac's decision to cast Alex Allen when the writer Antonin Artaud was unable to play the role of the clergyman due to acting in Carl Dreyer's movie A Passion of the Joan of Arc. Compared to Artaud, Allen was physically meek, and he portrayed the clergyman as being obsessive and lingering, which is a very stark contrast to the commanding presence of the more beautiful and conventionally attractive Artaud. Some common themes throughout this film are unholiness and the duality of man that is shown throughout, such as confusion of masculine and feminine. Germaine also uses dreams once again, and in response to the controversy of using the word dream when advertising the film, Germaine stated that it is, quote, not a dream, but the world of images itself taking the mind where it would never have agreed to go. The mechanism is within everyone's reach, end quote. Dulac's surreal effects protect the woman from the clergyman's desire and grasp, using editing and superimposition to have the woman escape from every advance. This short clip is showing you an example of this superimposition shown throughout the film. As you can see throughout this clip, it shows the clergyman eyeing the woman and superimposing an image of the woman's neck around his hands. Trying to keep him out of her grasp, the image changes into a boat. Another amazing Dulac film is The Smiling Madame Baudet from 1923 that's based on a story by the author Guy de Maupassant. This film is described as more impressionistic than surrealist, and it portrays a young woman who is trapped in a boring and loveless marriage with her husband, who continuously makes a joke of holding a revolver to his head and pulling the trigger. One day they argue, so she puts bullets into this revolver, hoping that the next time that he pulls this joke, he'll actually shoot himself and die. She feels guilty eventually and goes to retrieve the bullets, but he gets there before her. But this time, when he picks up the revolver to play the prank, the gun is aimed at her. No worries, though. Nobody dies, and the movie ends with them still in their sad, boring, and loveless marriage. In terms of editing throughout this film, Dulac uses superimpositions, daydreaming, descended images, and manipulation of the frame rate. This editing and daydreaming is the reason that this film is viewed as more impressionistic because of the daydreaming of Madame Baudet. This clip that I'm about to show you is one of the very first daydreams that Madame Baudet goes through while sitting bored with her husband. Similarly to Dulac's personal life, The Smiling Madame Baudet is all about the discontent in a heterosexual marriage. Madame Baudet herself is constantly interrupted by her husband as he stops her from reading, mocks her while she plays piano, and even knocks magazines out of her hands sometimes. She very obviously resents her husband as she spends her days fantasizing about other men and even dreaming about killing her husband. And although she uses the piano to play and calm herself, her husband unfortunately locks it up when he leaves, further showing how controlling the marriage truly is. Symbolically, she shows that she would rather have her husband dead than be unable to cope with the reality of her marriage, but at the end of the day, she still ends up in the same boring and loveless marriage. Probably my favorite film of all is Germaine's 1919 film, The Cigarette, that features a young liberated woman in Paris who unfortunately makes her husband jealous, leading him to believe that she's having an affair, and he then places a poisoned cigarette in his box, hoping to kill himself at some point. This clip that I'm about to show you is the moment that he thinks he is catching her having an affair. This clip from the cigarette reveals the wife at the golf club with Mr. Tremont, but the moment that the husband walks in to surprise her, he catches Herbert attempting to seduce his wife as she brushes him off. But then he catches them later, once again, when she goes out shopping. He actually took the inspiration for the poisoning of his cigarette from the story of the mummy that he had purchased that's shown in this film, claiming that he had mixed the poison into his own food in order to commit suicide when he was not brave enough to do it himself. However, in the end, she reveals that she found out and fooled his plan, that she loved him and she was always faithful, by finding out that the cigarette was poison and dumping out all the cigarettes in his pack. The last Germaine Dulac film I want to talk about today is Princess Mandane from 1928 that reworks a novel by Pierre Benoit, but rather than staying the normal adventure story it is, Dulac makes this opening scene of a dream story take place in a dark urban factory. A princess by the name of Mandane has been imprisoned in her own castle after telling her council of ministers that she wants to abdicate the throne. This married factory worker, Etienne, comes to Mingrelia, where Mandane is, and eventually he ends up rescuing her from the castle. However, unlike other stories, there's no professional love or big romantic kiss to his disappointment. It seems as though the princess and the servant, however, are the actual intended romantic pair in this story, alluding to also Dulac's queerness in her real life. This commercial feature integrated dance to express both social restriction and freedom. This quote from Germaine Dulac says, "Benoit's hero becomes a victim of the cinema. His obsession with all the glorious adventures of the screen forces him to abandon his peaceful life and roam the world. He becomes transported into a country full of wonders, a marvelous kingdom ruled by a fairy princess. A moral ends the story. After many adventures, my hero prefers to find happiness in simplicity." Considering it's very hard to find Princess Mandane online, I was unable to link it. However, I thought it was prominent to talk about the fashion and makeup throughout the film, considering I myself am a makeup artist, and I absolutely love this era of makeup. Throughout Princess Mandane, there's a heavy use of 1920s, bright and bold makeup, and honestly, I just wish I could have been there to do it at least once, because it looks super, super fun. Like any other great filmmaker, Germaine Dulac has also an impressive biography written about her by author Tammy Williams, called Germaine Dulac, A Cinema of Sensations. Tammy is an assistant professor of English and Film Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and she proves her knowledge very well in the extensive analysis of Germaine and both her work and her personal life. A quote from her in her novel says, quote, "In her films of the late 1920s, while she and Marie Anne Coulson Melville frequented the lesbian hotspots of Rue Lepic, Montmartre, Dulac used the rhythm of cinema and dance to tackle more socially controversial issues such as homosexuality." Just some miscellaneous facts that I love about Germaine are that during World War II, while the Nazis were in France, she made sure that many of the film prints that were seized would be returned in order to preserve them eventually. Starting in 1930 and ending with her life, she was in charge of production at the companies Pathé and then Gaumont. She is known as the pioneer of French cineclubs and film education, and although labeled the first surrealist film, The Seashell and the Clergyman was actually not really that much liked by surrealists at the time. Germaine's main goal was always pure cinema, away from the influence of any literature, theater, or even any other arts. And of course, my favorite fact of all is that Germaine was a queer woman, so at the top right I featured the only picture that I could find of her and any of her lovers, which is Germaine and Stasia to her right. To conclude my presentation on Germaine Dulac, I want to end with this quote from her that says, quote, "I believe that cinematographic work must come out of a shock of sensibility, of a vision of one being who can only express himself in the cinema. The director must be a screenwriter, or the screenwriter a director. Like all other arts, cinema comes from a sensible emotion, to be worth something and bring something. This emotion must come from one source only. The screenwriter that feels his idea must be able to stage it. From this, the technique follows." Thank you so much, and I hope you guys are all having a safe and healthy quarantine.